My daughter publicly disowned me, shouting, "You're not my mother." I then pulled her scholarship and her job offer. The air inside the grand ballroom hummed with the opulent murmur of high society. Chandeliers, countless crystals glittering like frozen tears, dripped light onto tables adorned with immaculate white lilies and bespoke silverware, each piece reflecting the diamond-encrusted watches and shimmering silk gowns of the city's elite. It was the annual St. Jude's Children's Hospital Charity Gala, an event Vivica, at 78 years old, had largely underwritten for the past decade. This quiet act of philanthropy, born from a genuine desire to give back and a deep respect for Edward's legacy, went mostly unnoticed by her family, who saw it merely as another opportunity for social climbing, a stage for their carefully curated performances. Vivica sat at a corner table, a serene, almost ethereal figure in a sapphire blue gown that mirrored the depth of her eyes. She observed the scene with a practiced, detached grace, a familiar weariness settling in her bones as she watched the predictable dance of ambition and superficiality. Her gaze, as it so often did, drifted towards her daughter Aurelia, a woman of 52 whose every gesture screamed calculated elegance, a carefully constructed facade that had taken decades to perfect. Aurelia glided through the room, her husband Thane, a man whose ambition often outstripped his acumen and whose smiles never quite reached his eyes, trailing dutifully behind. Aurelia was in her element, basking in the glow of cameras and whispered compliments, her cultivated image of success and beneficence radiating outward, a beacon of borrowed light. Vivica noticed the slight tension in Aurelia's jaw, the way her smile, though wide, never quite reached her eyes when a photographer lingered a moment too long. A familiar unease stirred within Vivica, a premonition she had learned to trust over many long years. Suddenly a sharp, piercing voice, raw with an unbridled fury, cut through the genteel hum, shattering the illusion of polite society. "You're not my mother. You hear me? You are not my mother." The words, ragged and venomous, ripped through the air like a physical force. All eyes swiveled, not to a newly arrived dignitary or a performing artist, but to Aurelia. Her face was contorted in a mask of incandescent fury, her meticulously applied makeup unable to conceal the raw emotion. She stood a mere few feet from Vivica, her arm outstretched, finger trembling as she pointed directly at the elegant matriarch. The minor social slight that had triggered her outburst, a junior event planner, flustered by the sheer number of VIPs, had momentarily misplaced Aurelia's seating card, assigning her to a slightly less prominent table than she felt her status deserved, seemed inconsequential to the raw, unbridled rage that now consumed her. It was a slight Vivica had barely registered, focused as she was on the quiet satisfaction of the evening's purpose. But to Aurelia it was a public affront, a challenge to her carefully cultivated superiority. The cameras, initially focused on a celebrity arriving, now swung wildly, capturing every horrifying angle of the public meltdown. Gasps rippled through the stunned attendees, their polite murmurs replaced by hushed whispers of scandal. Vivica, however, did not flinch. Her expression remained unreadable, a cool, almost glacial stillness settling over her features, a defense mechanism honed over decades of quiet suffering. She met her daughter's blazing eyes with a gaze that held not anger, but an infinite, bottomless weariness. It was a look that spoke volumes of a lifetime of quiet disappointments, of love unrequited, and of a profound soul-deep exhaustion that had settled deep within her very being. The words, echoing through the cavernous hall, were not merely an insult. They were a public execution of a relationship, a brutal severing of the last fragile thread that bound them, a declaration of independence that Vivica herself had often, in her darkest moments, yearned for but never dared to utter. The murmur swelled, transitioning from shock to thinly veiled gossip, quickly followed by the hungry hum of mobile phones capturing the spectacle. Aurelia, belatedly realizing the magnitude of her public spectacle, stumbled back, her face paling as Thane rushed to usher her away, whispering frantic apologies to those nearby, his own face a mask of mortified embarrassment. But the damage was done. The phrase, "You're not my mother," hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement that reverberated through Vivica's mind, not as a wound but as a confirmation. Vivica watched them retreat, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor running through her hand as she reached for her half-empty glass of champagne. Her eyes, though steady, held a newly forged resolve. The weight of decades of emotional burden, of unspoken sacrifices and unappreciated gestures, seemed to lift, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a fresh wound, yet paradoxically liberating. She took a slow, deliberate sip, the bubbles tickling her tongue, a strange taste of freedom on her palate, a flicker of something new, something akin to a cold, steel-edged peace, settled deep within her heart. For Vivica, this public humiliation was not the end of her world. It was the definitive, undeniable beginning of a new one, a world where she was finally, truly free. Vivica's life had once been a vibrant tapestry woven with love, ambition, and quiet contentment. Her late husband, Edward, had been a visionary architect, a man of integrity and immense talent whose legacy was etched into the very skyline of the city, not just in concrete and glass, but in the enduring principles he lived by. He had been her anchor, her confidant, the one person who saw her completely, who cherished her not for what she possessed, but for who she was. Their home, a beacon of warmth and intellectual curiosity, had been filled with laughter and lively discussions, their decisions made together, their future envisioned as a shared journey. When he passed away 15 years prior, too soon and too suddenly, he left Vivica not just a vast fortune, but a meticulously managed empire of investments, properties, and trusts. Edward had always understood the ephemeral nature of wealth, and he had instilled in Vivica a deep sense of responsibility towards it, a responsibility she believed extended to her family, a tool for growth and opportunity, never for entitlement. Her children, Aurelia and her brother Marcus, were meant to be beneficiaries of this legacy, not its entitled heirs, not the leeches who would drain its lifeblood. Marcus, unlike Aurelia, had always maintained a respectful distance, forging his own path with quiet determination, albeit with some initial assistance from his mother that was always repaid, always acknowledged with genuine gratitude. He understood the value of hard work, a trait Edward had deeply admired. Vivica's deepest desire had always been simple: reciprocal love, respect, and inclusion. She yearned for genuine connection, for family dinners where her opinions were sought, for holiday celebrations where she was truly welcomed, not merely tolerated as the matriarch with the overflowing purse. She pictured warm, intimate gatherings, children's laughter that wasn't followed by a request for a new gadget, conversations that weren't thinly veiled attempts to extract more funds. But as the years unfolded, her role within the family solidified into something far less dignified. She became the living ATM, the endless fount of funds that flowed freely, seemingly without limit, to support lifestyles that far exceeded her children's own earning capacities. The quiet hope she clung to, the belief that her generosity would one day open their hearts, slowly withered. The pattern began subtly, almost imperceptibly, after Edward's passing. Aurelia, always quick to sense an opportunity, always possessing a keen nose for potential advantage, was the first to approach her mother for financial assistance. It started with seemingly modest requests, cloaked in concern for her children's future. "Mother, darling," Aurelia would begin, her voice sweet as honey, "you know how important Celeste's education is. This new private school, St. Bartholomew's, it's absolutely essential for her future. All the best families send their children there." Celeste, then just a bright-eyed 7-year-old, was the bait. Vivica, doting on her grandchild and eager to see her thrive, to provide opportunities she herself hadn't had, readily agreed, setting up a direct payment system that would cover Celeste's education from elementary school through university. This initial generosity, however, quickly morphed into an expectation, a blank check with no moral limits. Soon the requests escalated, losing their veneer of necessity and embracing outright luxury. Aurelia and Thane, despite Thane's supposedly shrewd business ventures that perpetually teetered on the brink of collapse, developed an insatiable appetite for the trappings of wealth, for the outward display of success they so desperately craved. Their first grand home, a sprawling property in an exclusive gated community, was secured with a substantial down payment from Vivica, a sum close to $2 million, which they casually referred to as a loan that was never, not once, discussed for repayment. "Mother, you know how tight things are with Thane's new venture," Aurelia would coo over the phone, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "And this house is perfect for entertaining clients. It's an investment, really. It will raise our profile." Vivica, desperate for their approval and a sense of belonging in their polished world, would always acquiesce, her heart heavy with the unspoken understanding that this was simply another transaction in their increasingly one-sided relationship. She would often walk through their cavernous, tastefully decorated rooms, feeling like a stranger, an interloper who merely supplied the funds, never truly belonged. Then came the cars. Vivica remembered vividly the day Aurelia called, distraught, claiming their old luxury sedan. A vehicle barely 3 years old, perfectly pristine, was embarrassing for Thane to drive to his high-stakes meetings. "It simply doesn't convey the right image, Mother. People judge." Within a week, a brand-new top-of-the-line German luxury car, financed entirely by Vivica, sat in their driveway, a gleaming symbol of her unending wellspring. A few months later, a sleek sports car, a vibrant red, appeared for Aurelia, a necessary indulgence for her social engagements, and, as she put it, to maintain appearances. Vivica herself drove a modest, well-maintained car Edward had bought her years ago, a silent testament to her own understated elegance amidst their ostentatious displays, a stark contrast that was not lost on her. The sight of their ever-new vehicles, constantly updated, while her own remained steadfast, often brought a quiet ache to her chest. Holidays were another point of contention, or rather, another avenue for exploitation. Every year, Aurelia would meticulously plan elaborate multi-country vacations, expecting Vivica to foot the entire bill for the entire family: flights, 5-star accommodations, private tours, even the designer shopping sprees. Vivica would often find herself an afterthought, sometimes even relegated to a smaller, less desirable room in the grand villas they rented, an uncomfortable guest in her own generosity. On one particularly memorable trip to the Italian Riviera, a trip for which Vivica had paid a staggering sum for private yacht charters and Michelin-star dining, Vivica overheard Aurelia complaining to Thane about Vivica's slow pace, holding them back from a shopping excursion. "She's so old, Thane. Can't she just stay in the villa and read? We could be out enjoying ourselves." Vivica's heart had ached, a sharp, familiar pain, as if a shard of glass had pierced her. She had paid for the entire lavish 2-week trip, yet she was merely a burden, an inconvenient appendage, a quiet embarrassment. Her grandchildren, Celeste and her younger brother, Julian, also learned quickly where the real power lay, where the endless wellspring of gifts resided. Celeste, now a young woman, was particularly adept at manipulating Vivica's affections, her requests always framed with a sweet smile and a carefully chosen compliment. Her elite education, entirely funded by Vivica, had instilled in her a sense of entitlement that mirrored her mother's, a belief that anything she desired was within reach, as long as Vivica was there to provide. Vivica paid for Celeste's expensive ballet classes, her international debate club trips to Geneva and Tokyo, her designer clothes that cost more than Vivica's entire wardrobe, and her numerous gadgets, each one the latest model. When Julian, a charming but often lazy young man with an aversion to real effort, expressed an interest in a new cutting-edge gaming PC, Vivica bought him the most expensive model on the market, hoping to spark a genuine interest, a flicker of ambition beyond the screen. Their gratitude, if it existed at all, was fleeting, quickly replaced by new demands, new desires, a constant unspoken expectation. The disrespect was not just financial. It permeated every aspect of their interactions, a slow, insidious poison that eroded Vivica's spirit. Family gatherings, which Vivica desperately craved, became rare and strained, often feeling like formal business meetings rather than celebrations of kinship. Important decisions, where Celeste would apply for university, Julian's career path, even plans for holidays, were made without her input. She would often learn about them secondhand, through casual mentions or, more often, Through social media posts that depicted a seemingly happy, united family, of which she was merely the financier. Aurelia and Thane would frequently forget to invite her to significant events, like Celeste's high school graduation party or Julian's sports awards ceremony, only to apologize profusely later, blaming misplaced invitations or email glitches. Vivica knew these were calculated omissions, designed to make her feel irrelevant, a mere purse string, not a beloved family member. The sting of these deliberate oversights was often sharper than any financial demand. Behind her back, the belittling was even worse, a cruel mockery of her generosity. Vivica once accidentally overheard a conversation between Aurelia and Thane during a family Christmas dinner. One of the rare occasions Vivica was present, having insisted on hosting it, hoping to recapture some semblance of warmth. "Honestly, Thane, Mother is getting so senile," Aurelia had hissed, her voice low but piercingly clear. She asked about the same thing twice. "It's a good thing we have access to her funds now, before she completely loses it and gives it all to some charity." Thane had chuckled, a low guttural sound. "Just make sure she signs those papers for the new investment, darling, before she forgets where she put her spectacles." The words had felt like daggers, plunging deep into Vivica's heart, not because of their cruelty, but because they stripped away her last illusion, that they held any genuine affection for her. Senile? She was sharper than both of them combined, meticulously managing Edward's legacy, reviewing every financial statement with a keen eye, despite their thinly veiled contempt for her outdated methods. She had seen through their thinly veiled manipulations for years, but she had chosen, out of love and a desperate hope, to remain silent. The years of quiet pain, of feeling like a ghost in her own family, of being a financial necessity rather than a cherished matriarch, had taken their toll. Vivica had often contemplated severing ties, the thought a fleeting, desperate whisper in the darkest hours of the night. But the hope, the desperate, lingering hope, that one day they would see her, truly see her, for the loving mother and grandmother she was, always held her back. She had always believed that true family love transcended money, that her generosity would eventually earn her the respect she craved, that they would eventually appreciate her for herself. She had been wrong. The gala, the public disowning, was not just a culmination of years of disrespect. It was the final, irrefutable proof that her love, her very being, held no value to them beyond the zeros in her bank account. The shattering blow was complete, yet in its wake, an unexpected clarity emerged. The silence, the public shame, paradoxically, had set her free, severing the last tendrils of a hope that had long since become a burden. The chill of the ballroom had seeped into Vivica's bones, but it was a coldness that invigorated, not numbed. As soon as the gala concluded, and the last of the sycophantic well-wishers had offered their shallow condolences, Vivica did not return home. The thought of stepping back into the silence of her grand, empty house, still permeated by the ghosts of her unfulfilled hopes, was unbearable. Instead, she had her driver take her directly to the quiet, discreet offices of Henderson and Davies, her private bankers and legal counsel. It was a Saturday night, but for Vivica, time had ceased to exist. Her decision was made, etched in the raw pain of public betrayal and the newfound clarity that followed, and she would not falter. Mr. Henderson, her long-standing private banker, a man whose silver hair and quiet demeanor belied a razor-sharp intellect, met her at the door, his face a mixture of concern and professional deference. He had served Edward, then Vivica, for over 30 years, understanding the family dynamics perhaps better than anyone outside their immediate circle. Ms. Davies, her legal counsel, a formidable woman in her late 40s known for her strategic mind and unyielding resolve, stood beside him, her expression grim. They had been expecting her call, having seen the humiliating spectacle unfold on the evening news, the sensational headlines already screaming across every major network. "Vivica," Mr. Henderson began, his voice low and sympathetic, "are you quite all right? We saw the news reports." Vivica held up a hand, a small, elegant gesture that stopped him mid-sentence. Her voice, though soft, carried an undeniable steel, a resonance of long-suppressed power finally unleashed. "I am perfectly all right, Mr. Henderson. Better than I have been in years, in fact. We are enacting the contingency plan. All of it. Now." The words were calm, devoid of anger, yet held the weight of an irrevocable decree. Mr. Henderson nodded, his expression shifting to one of grim understanding. He and Ms. Davies had, at Vivica's insistence, prepared such a plan years ago, a meticulously crafted legal and financial framework designed for precisely this eventuality, the complete and immediate severance of all financial ties. Vivica had always dismissed it as a morbid exercise, a just-in-case scenario she prayed would never come to pass, a testament to her enduring foolish hope. Tonight it was her salvation, the blueprint for her liberation. For the next 4 hours Vivica, with an almost surgical precision, dictated the dissolution of her family's financial lifelines. She sat at the polished mahogany table, a pen in hand, signing document after document, each stroke of the ink a deliberate act of liberation, a severing of the parasitic connections that had bound her for so long. "First, the Aurelia and Thane joint account," Vivica instructed, her voice steady, her gaze fixed on a distant point. "Terminate it. Immediately. No grace period. No transfer of funds. Any outstanding direct debits for their household expenses are to be cancelled. The electricity bill, the water bill, their exorbitant property taxes. All their responsibility now. Let them learn the cost of a utility." Mr. Henderson made a note, his pen scratching quietly, a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval from Miss Davies. "Next," she continued, "the mortgage payments on their primary residence. That substantial portion I have been covering for the past 10 years? Cease. Effective immediately. They have 2 payments before default. Let them explain to their bank why their investment house is suddenly at risk." Vivica remembered the initial plea from Aurelia, a decade ago, her voice laced with feigned desperation. "Just for a few years, Mother. Until Thane's business takes off." 10 years had passed, and Thane's business was still perpetually about to take off, perpetually needing another infusion of Vivica's cash. "The luxury vehicles," Vivica stated, a faint, ironic smile touching her lips. "The 2 cars purchased in the last 5 years under my name for Aurelia and Thane's use. Have them repossessed. Discreetly but swiftly. Send them a notice tomorrow morning. They can explain it to their neighbors, to their social set, how their glittering facade was built on a lie." She recalled Aurelia's smug delight over her new sports car, bragging about its custom features at a luncheon Vivica had attended, where she was introduced merely as Aurelia's elderly mother, her financial contribution conveniently erased from the narrative. "The trust fund for Celeste's university education," Vivica continued, her gaze unwavering, though a flicker of pain crossed her features at the thought of her grandchild. "The one that covered her tuition at Cambridge and her lavish living expenses? Dissolve it. The scholarship is revoked. Inform the university's bursar's office first thing Monday morning. She will have to find her own funding, or another institution, one that values academic merit over inherited wealth." Vivica had poured millions into Celeste's education, envisioning a brilliant, independent young woman contributing to the world. Instead, Celeste had called only to demand more funds for networking events and luxury study trips, never once asking about Vivica's well-being, never expressing a hint of genuine appreciation. "And Julian," Vivica said, a sigh escaping her lips, a deep breath releasing years of disappointment. "The job offer I personally secured for him at Sterling and Company, the prestigious consulting firm? Rescind it. Inform the firm's HR department that my sponsorship has been withdrawn. He can find employment on his own merits, if he possesses any beyond a talent for video games." Vivica had pulled countless strings, leveraged every ounce of her social capital, called in favors she had saved for decades, to secure that coveted position for her entitled grandson, who had shown little interest in anything beyond expensive nights out and the latest gaming consoles. The thought of his inevitable shock brought no joy, only a quiet resolve. Ms. Davies diligently drafted the legal notices, The termination letters, the instructions to various financial institutions, her pen flying across the crisp paper. "Vivica," she interjected gently, her voice a calm counterpoint to the gravity of the situation. "Are you certain about the full extent of this? The impact will be profound. They will be utterly unprepared." Vivica met her gaze, her eyes surprisingly clear, devoid of regret. "Profound? Ms. Davies, what was profound was watching my daughter publicly declare I was not her mother, after decades of being nothing but a financial conduit for their extravagant lives, for their insatiable greed. This is simply a correction, a restoration of balance, a reclaiming of my own life." The words were spoken with a quiet finality, leaving no room for argument or doubt. By the time the first rays of dawn filtered through the office windows, casting long pale shadows across the room, the paperwork was complete. Vivica stood up, a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in years, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had just dismantled an empire, not her own, but one built entirely on her generosity, on her unrequited love, and she felt nothing but a quiet, profound relief, a sense of cleansing. Meanwhile, in their sprawling Vivica-funded mansion, Aurelia and Thane's world was beginning to unravel, though they didn't know it yet. The initial ripples of panic were small, almost imperceptible, dismissed as minor inconveniences. On Monday morning, Aurelia attempted to purchase a new designer handbag online. Her credit card was declined. She scoffed, assuming it was a bank error, a temporary glitch, and tried another, then another. Declined again. She called her bank, only to be met with a cold, impersonal recording stating her account was frozen due to insufficient funds. "Impossible!" she shrieked, slamming the phone down, her face contorting in frustration. "It must be a system error." Thane, meanwhile, was in his lavish home office, attempting to pay his golf club membership fees, a considerable sum that had always been automatically deducted. His corporate card, usually limitless, was rejected. He called his assistant, demanding she investigate. "There must be a mistake. This account is always flush. I have important meetings to attend there." He was growing increasingly agitated, his usual veneer of calm cracking under the pressure. The first email arrived then, from their property management company, informing them that their quarterly property tax payment, usually handled automatically, had been returned unpaid. A shiver of unease, cold and unwelcome, ran down his spine. It was just an email, but the wording was stark, unusually blunt. Later that afternoon, a call came through to Aurelia's cell phone. It was Celeste, her voice thin and reedy, bordering on hysteria, utterly unlike her usual composed demeanor. "Mom, my tuition. Cambridge called. They said my scholarship. It's been revoked." "What does revoked mean?" "They said I owe them hundreds of thousands. They're threatening to expel me." Aurelia's blood ran cold, a prickle of genuine fear replacing her irritation. Then came the call to Julian. He was at a celebratory lunch with his new colleagues from Sterling and Company, toasting his perceived success, when his phone rang. It was HR. His job offer, they explained, had been rescinded due to unforeseen circumstances regarding sponsorship. Julian, confused and utterly humiliated, stammered, "But my grandmother sponsored me. What are you talking about?" He called Aurelia immediately, his voice incredulous and panicked, a raw edge of fear he had never shown before. The pieces, initially disparate and confusing, began to click into place with terrifying speed. The credit card declines, the bounced payments, the scholarship revocation, the rescinded job offer. All connected. All pointed to one person, Vivica. The realization hit Aurelia and Thane like a physical blow, stripping away their carefully constructed facade of invincibility, of effortless wealth. Their carefully cultivated lives, their social standing, their very existence, were built on Vivica's generosity, on her quiet, endless supply of funds. And now the wellspring had run dry. The panic escalated, morphing into a desperate, furious rage, a primal scream of disbelief and betrayal. They had to confront her. Immediately. There was no other option. The following morning, Aurelia and Thane burst through the front gates of Vivica's sprawling estate, their faces a thundercloud of fury and desperation. They had driven themselves, their repossessed luxury cars having been unceremoniously taken from their driveway just hours before, leaving them with an embarrassing rental. The humiliation was a fresh wound, festering with every mile. Aurelia's hair was disheveled, her expensive clothes wrinkled, a stark contrast to her usual immaculate appearance, a mirror of the chaos within her. Thane's tie was askew, his usual composure shattered, his jaw clenched, revealing a raw, desperate man beneath the polished exterior. Vivica's loyal butler, Arthur, a man who had served her family for over 40 years and seen every facet of their dysfunction, every subtle manipulation, every quiet heartbreak, met them at the door. His expression was impassive, yet his eyes held a knowing glint, a silent acknowledgement of the reckoning he had long predicted. "Madam is in the conservatory having her morning tea," he announced, his voice devoid of warmth, a cool, polite barrier. They stormed past him, their footsteps echoing through the grand hall, a cacophony of their unraveling world. They found Vivica seated amidst her orchids and ferns, a delicate porcelain teacup in her hand, the quiet beauty of the conservatory a stark contrast to their frenzied disarray. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant silk robe, her silver hair impeccably styled, gleaming in the morning light. A book lay open beside her, its pages filled with the wisdom of centuries past, and the morning sun bathed her in a soft ethereal glow. She looked utterly serene, a picture of tranquil composure, as if the world outside, with its petty demands and public shaming, had no power to disturb her inner peace. "Mother, what have you done?" Aurelia shrieked, her voice cracking with indignation, disbelief, and a rising tide of panic. "My cards are declined. Our accounts are frozen. Celeste's scholarship. It's gone. They're threatening to expel her. You've ruined everything." Thane, usually the more composed of the two, the smoother operator, leaned over Vivica's table, his face inches from hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Vivica, this is madness. You cannot do this. Do you know what this means? Our businesses will collapse. We will lose everything. Our home, our standing, our reputation." His voice was a low, dangerous growl, laced with a raw desperation Vivica had never heard from him before. A desperate plea from a man whose very identity was tied to his perceived wealth. Vivica slowly placed her teacup back on its saucer, the gentle clink the only sound in the tense silence, a punctuation mark in the unfolding drama. She looked from Aurelia's tear-streaked face to Thane's contorted one, observing them as if they were specimens under a microscope. Her eyes, clear and unwavering, held no trace of the familiar hurt or resignation they had grown accustomed to seeing, the vulnerability they had so cruelly exploited. There was only a profound, almost chilling calm, a quiet power that seemed to emanate from her very core. "I have done precisely what was necessary," Vivica replied, her voice soft but resonating with an unyielding power, a calm authority that seemed to deflate their fury. "I have merely stopped the flow of funds from my accounts to yours. Funds that, I might add, you have come to view as an entitlement, rather than a gift, a tool for your endless consumption." "A gift!" Aurelia raged, tears streaming down her face, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. "It's my birthright. You're my mother. You owe us this. You have more money than you could ever spend. What do you need it for? To sit in this dusty old house and read your books? To hoard it like a dragon?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Vivica's lips, a smile of deep irony, of quiet amusement at their profound misunderstanding. "My birthright? Aurelia, your birthright was a loving home, an excellent education, and the values of hard work and integrity, instilled by a father who believed in self-reliance. Not a lifetime supply of my late husband's fortune, which you have squandered on superficial luxuries and the maintenance of a false image, a hollow shell of success." Thane stepped forward, attempting a different tactic, his voice softening, dripping with false concern, a desperate attempt to manipulate. Vivica, please reconsider. You're upset. We understand. But think of the grandchildren. Celeste's future, Julian's career. You can't ruin their lives. You love them, don't you? You wouldn't do this to them. His words were a desperate play on her known affection, a last-ditch effort to pull her emotional strings. Vivica's eyes, however, did not waver from his. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, seeing through his transparent attempt. I do love them, Thane, which is precisely why I have done this. They have learned nothing but entitlement and dependence from both of you. Celeste has learned to manipulate for her desires, never to earn. Julian has learned that connections, not merit, will pave his way, that effort is unnecessary. These are not lessons I wish to impart, nor enable. Their true education begins now. This is emotional blackmail. Aurelia shrieked, resorting to her usual playbook, the victim card she had so often played. You're doing this because I embarrassed you at the gala. You're a spiteful, vindictive old woman. You're punishing us. Vivica slowly rose from her chair, her posture regal, her gaze piercing, seeming to grow taller, more imposing with every word. Her presence filled the room, dwarfing them in their desperation. Spiteful? Vindictive? Aurelia, you stood before hundreds of our city's most influential people, at an event I largely funded, and publicly disowned me. You shouted, "You're not my mother," as if my very existence was an unbearable shame to you. You did not just embarrass me. You annihilated me in front of the world. And yet I feel no spite, only a profound sense of clarity, a quiet understanding of what truly matters. She walked towards them, her every step deliberate, measured, her presence radiating an undeniable power. For decades I have been your silent financier, your living ATM, a constant source you believed would never run dry. I paid for your grand homes, she recounted, her voice calm, listing off the specific examples that now stung them like 1,000 bees, each truth a precise, undeniable blow. The $2 million down payment on your first mansion, which you never once considered repaying. I paid for your luxury vehicles, that German sedan Thane so desperately needed for his image, and Aurelia's sports car, which you boasted about as if you'd earned it, as if it were a symbol of your own achievement. I covered your extravagant vacations, Italy, the Maldives, the private jets, while I was often relegated to an afterthought, a burden and inconvenient passenger. I paid for Celeste's elite schooling from kindergarten, her university tuition at Cambridge, her networking trips, her designer wardrobe. I secured Julian's coveted job offer, pulling strings I never thought I'd have to pull, leveraging my deepest connections, for a boy who showed no initiative, no drive, beyond his own comfort. Aurelia and Thane stood frozen, their faces paling, their eyes wide with dawning horror as Vivica systematically dismantled their carefully constructed illusions, each truth a hammer blow, exposing the fragile foundation of their lives. All I ever asked for was love, respect, and to be treated as family, not as a resource, not as the liability. You consistently excluded me, belittled me behind my back, and saw my wealth as your birthright, something to be exploited, not cherished. You spoke of me as senile, as if I were a foolish old woman to be managed and milked for every last cent. Do you truly believe I was unaware? Vivica's voice hardened slightly, a steel edge cutting through the calm. I heard you, Aurelia. I heard you tell Thane I was holding you back, that I was a burden. I heard you, Thane, discussing how to get me to sign papers before I forget where I put my spectacles. Do you think an old woman's ears cease to function? Do you think her mind dulls so completely that she cannot recognize the contempt in your voices? The silence that followed was deafening, thick with their shame and shock, a silence that finally broke their defiance. The gala, Vivica continued, her voice regaining its serene yet resolute tone, was the final insult. Your public declaration, "You're not my mother," was not just a tantrum, it was a severing. And I have simply acknowledged it. You are right, Aurelia. I am not your mother, not anymore. Not in the way you define it. Not in a way that allows you to continue to drain my life's blood for your avarice, to live a life of empty luxury at my expense. Aurelia opened her mouth to speak, to perhaps try another tearful plea, another manipulation, but Vivica held up a hand, stopping her. My decision is final. Every financial tie, every payment, every direct debit, every scholarship, every job offer secured through my influence, all have been irrevocably terminated. You will learn, as I have, that self-sufficiency is a powerful, if sometimes painful, teacher. You will learn to stand on your own 2 feet, as I once believed you were capable of doing. My part in your lives is complete. Her gaze, calm and unyielding, swept over them, stripping them bare of their pretenses, exposing the raw, desperate individuals beneath. I have nothing more to say to either of you. You may leave. The dismissal was absolute, delivered with an authority that left no room for argument or appeal. Aurelia and Thane, defeated and shattered, their world having just imploded before their very eyes, stumbled backward, their carefully constructed lives reduced to rubble. They had come to manipulate, to coerce, to demand. They left empty-handed, leaving behind not a victorious Vivica, but a woman finally truly free. Aurelia and Thane drove away from Vivica's estate in stunned silence, the air in their borrowed car thick with the stench of their own ruin, of their desperate fear. The initial shock quickly gave way to a wave of desperate, frantic energy, a scramble to reclaim what they had lost. Back at their sprawling mansion, which now felt less like a home and more like an impending tomb, a monument to their borrowed prosperity, they began to make a flurry of calls, each one bringing more devastating news. The first calls were to their own banks, only to confirm what Vivica had so calmly articulated. Their accounts were indeed empty, their credit lines cancelled, and any direct debits linked to Vivica's accounts had been terminated. They were financially naked. Then came the calls from creditors, polite but firm. The mortgage company informed them that the next payment was overdue, and if not received within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. The luxury car dealerships called, inquiring about the missing vehicles, threatening legal action for breach of contract, their tone cold and demanding. Their social secretary called, flustered, to say that their invitations to several high-profile events had been suddenly revoked, and that their annual donation to the city's largest art museum, a key element of their social standing, had bounced. The carefully cultivated facade of wealth and influence they had meticulously built was crumbling around them, brick by agonizing brick, exposing the rot beneath. Aurelia collapsed onto a velvet sofa, clutching her head, her once pristine hair now a mess, her designer clothes crumpled. What are we going to do, Thane? What are we going to tell everyone? Our friends, the club members, Celeste, Julian. Her voice was a choked sob, raw with fear and humiliation. Thane, usually so assured, paced the room like a caged animal, his hands running through his already disheveled hair. We'll figure something out. Vivica is just being emotional. She'll calm down. She always does. She can't possibly mean this. But even as he said the words, they sounded hollow, devoid of conviction, a desperate whisper against the roar of their impending doom. Vivica's eyes, so cold and resolute, had extinguished any hope of a quick reversal, any softening of her resolve. The next few weeks were a descent into financial chaos and social ostracization, a brutal lesson in self-reliance they had never intended to learn. Their credit cards were useless, forcing them to pay for everything in cash, which quickly dwindled. They started arguing constantly, their voices sharp and bitter, blaming each other for their predicament, for their spectacular downfall. Thane's shrewd business deals, which had always relied on Vivica's quiet backing for collateral or emergency infusions of cash, swiftly unraveled, revealed as empty promises. Investors, sensing weakness, pulled out, their trust evaporated. The luxurious life they had taken for granted evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Celeste, expelled from Cambridge, returned home in a fury, her dreams of a glamorous future shattered. She blamed her parents for their incompetence and Vivica for her cruelty, unable to grasp her own role in her grandmother's decision. Julian, unable to secure any other comparable job offer without Vivica's influence, found himself scrambling for low-paying entry-level positions, a bitter pill for a young man who believed he was destined for immediate success, for effortless privilege. The once vibrant household, filled with laughter and extravagant parties, became a pressure cooker of resentment, fear, and recrimination. Their friends, once so eager to bask in their reflected glory, suddenly became scarce, their calls unanswered, their invitations unextended. The whispers in high society intensified, fueled by the public gala incident and the sudden undeniable signs of their financial distress. The once coveted mansion became a monument to their spectacular downfall, a grand and empty shell. Meanwhile, Vivica took her first deep breath of true freedom, a breath that felt cleaner, lighter than any she had taken in decades. The day after the confrontation, she did not dwell on the pain or the past. She contacted her oldest, dearest friend, Eleanor, a vibrant woman of 80 who had always championed Vivica's independence, often gently urging her to stop being their personal bank. "Eleanor," Vivica said, her voice light with a newfound joy, a bubbling enthusiasm Eleanor hadn't heard in years. "How would you like to finally take that cruise to Antarctica we always dreamed of? And then perhaps a safari in Tanzania? My treat for real this time." Eleanor, overjoyed by her friend's newfound resolve, immediately agreed, a joyous reunion of kindred spirits. Vivica spent the first few weeks reacquainting herself with herself, rediscovering the woman Edward had loved, the woman she had lost beneath layers of family obligation and unrequited love. She visited art galleries, lingering over paintings that spoke to her soul. She attended classical concerts, letting the music wash over her, soothing old wounds. She rediscovered her love for gardening, spending hours among her roses, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing life. She began to spend her money not to buy affection, but to experience life, to cultivate joy, to pursue the passions she had long suppressed. She commissioned a local artist to paint a vibrant mural in her sunroom, a burst of color where once only silent expectations had resided, a symbol of her blossoming spirit. She enrolled in a series of lectures on ancient history, a subject Edward had loved and which she had always wanted to explore, now with an unburdened mind. The house, once filled with the ghosts of unfulfilled hopes, now hummed with a quiet, vibrant energy, reflecting the peace within its mistress, a home transformed into a sanctuary. Months passed. The chill of autumn had given way to the crisp promise of winter, then the soft bloom of spring, and finally the warmth of summer. Vivica's world had transformed, shedding the stifling weight of obligation and embracing the lightness of self-discovery. She had indeed gone on her Antarctic cruise with Eleanor, marveling at the colossal icebergs and the playful penguins, feeling utterly insignificant and profoundly connected to the grandeur of nature. The safari in Tanzania had followed, where she had stood in awe of the vast plains and the majestic wildlife, feeling utterly alive and connected to something far grander than material wealth. She had begun to host small, intimate gatherings at her estate, inviting old friends who had always valued her for herself, new acquaintances from her art classes and history lectures who saw her as an engaging peer, and even distant relatives who genuinely valued her company, not her coffers. Her laughter, once a rare and fragile sound, now bubbled freely, a testament to her profound contentment. She was flourishing, a magnificent late bloomer, spending her days pursuing hobbies she genuinely enjoyed, supporting charities she deeply believed in, causes that truly made a difference, and investing in experiences that enriched her soul, not her ego. The money Edward had left her, once a tool for conditional love, a source of endless demands, was now truly her own, a means to cultivate a life of purpose, joy, and profound peace. Aurelia and Thane, however, had learned the harsh lessons Vivica had predicted, lessons forged in the crucible of their own making. Their mansion, once a symbol of their false prosperity, had been foreclosed upon, taken by the bank. They had been forced to downsize dramatically, moving into a modest rental apartment in a less desirable part of town, a stark reminder of their lost status. Thane, his business ventures having utterly collapsed, his reputation in tatters, was now working a low-level sales job, struggling to make ends meet, his pride shattered, his former swagger replaced by a defeated slump. Aurelia, stripped of her social standing and her endless supply of funds, found herself unable to maintain the lavish lifestyle she believed was her due. She, too, had to find employment, taking a position as an administrative assistant, a role she considered beneath her, constantly complaining about the indignity of it all, her resentment a bitter shroud. Celeste, having lost her Cambridge scholarship, was now attending a state university on a loan, working part-time jobs to support herself, a rude awakening to the realities of financial independence. The initial rage had morphed into a grudging acceptance of reality, and sometimes a quiet resentment towards her parents for their inability to provide the life she felt she deserved. Julian, after numerous failed attempts to land a prestigious job, his lack of initiative glaringly obvious without his grandmother's influence, had finally taken a grueling overnight shift at a warehouse, a stark contrast to the consulting career he had envisioned, a physical and emotional toll taking its toll on his pampered existence. The family, once bound by Vivica's purse strings, was now fragmented, forced to confront the stark realities of self-reliance, their old bonds broken by their shared resentment and desperate circumstances. They rarely spoke to Vivica, and when they did, it was usually a hesitant, almost pathetic attempt to gauge if she might have softened, if the spigot might be turned back on, a hopeful glimmer in their eyes. Vivica, however, remained resolute, polite but firm, her boundaries now unbreachable, her peace too precious to compromise. This story of Vivica's journey from quiet heartbreak to resounding liberation is a powerful one, isn't it? Our channel is dedicated to bringing you more true stories of justice, resilience, and life lessons that will make you think, make you feel, and sometimes make you cheer. If you were moved by Vivica's strength and her incredible transformation, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next compelling story. We have many more tales of resilience and personal triumph waiting for you. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever encountered such blatant ingratitude or entitlement in your own life? And if you were in Vivica's shoes, facing such a public betrayal, what would you have done? Would you have found the strength to cut ties completely, or would hope have held you back? Let us know your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories are what make this community so special.